Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our special webinar, Summer Travel on a Budget. I am Sarah Bickers. I work on Credit Union's financial education team, where I go out into our communities and teach financial wellness topics like budgeting, credit, navigating financial decisions, and more. This special webinar is Summer Travel on a Budget, and I am super, super excited about this one because one of my personal passions is travel, and another one is financial education. And being able to talk about how we can get out, enjoy the summer, travel, have a good time while sticking to our budget and knowing what that budget is something that is just super close to my heart, super important. And I'm really excited to share some tips and tricks with you all today and some things to consider. That being said, what we're going to go over is how to set your travel budget. So some general budgeting tips and tricks, things to review. Travel savings tips specifically because there are a lot of different expenses to be aware of and think about with traveling, and cutting those expenses when and where we can help us stick to that budget that we've set. And then travel budget busters to watch out for, things that might get our budget, things that we might want to just pay attention to so that way we're able to avoid those and stick to the plan that we have in place. Super excited to go through all of this with you. As I'm talking, if you have questions that come up, feel free to send me a message over. I'll try to get them at the end, but let's go into it. The first thing that we really want to talk about is what that travel budget might look like. So there are a few different sources that have released kind of their 2025 summer travel statistics, what they kind of anticipate people are going to spend in 2025 for travel. And what they found is that about 44% of US adults plan on taking a summer vacation that includes a flight or hotel booking in 2025. Of that group that plans on taking a vacation that has that flight or hotel booking, on average, they expect them to spend about $3,861 per person. Note that is with a trip that has a flight or hotel booking in 2025. So there's a group of folks that plan on spending a good amount of money on this travel. With that, they've also found that while only 44% are planning on taking that vacation with a flight or hotel booking, 87%, so almost a lot of us, like most of us here of US adults, plan on having at least one night away from home this summer. And what they found is when people say they don't have travel plans, probably not to our surprise, affordability for traveling is the number one reason why they say they don't have travel plans, because traveling can be really, really expensive. So when we're thinking, I'd like to get out this summer, I'd like to go on a vacation, but I don't want to break the bank, I don't want to bust the budget, I want to stay on this plan that I have. How are we able to do that? What are some things to keep in mind? Be it a big trip that you're planning on taking with a flight or hotel, you still want to stay within that plan there, or you're just planning on getting away from home for one night and keep it a little smaller, but still have that fun, still have that adventure, still have that summer travel that we're talking about today. So when we talk about budgeting for travel, there's some big picture budgeting things to share. Step one, surprise, surprise, is determining that budget. How much can you realistically spend on travel? And in order to determine how much you can realistically spend on travel, it helps to have a big picture budget, all the other things kind of accounted for, what those needs are that you're accounting for, what you have set aside for that to make sure you're covering your needs. Travel for most people falls into that want category one way or the other, but some of us might need to travel, so maybe it kind of shifts into there. And then that savings piece as well. A lot of us save up ideally for the travel that we're going on. So maybe it's reflected in a few of these categories, but where else in our budget are we planning on? What else does that look like? Kind of getting that set up so that we know what do we have realistically to spend on travel. Once we get that big picture budget and then the travel piece set for it, thinking about what our travel priorities are. This is something that anytime we talk about budgeting, we recommend thinking about your priorities, thinking about your values, thinking about your goals, and aligning all your budget with that. So if travel is a priority that you have, something that you plan on spending on, something that you're working toward within your budget, what does travel really mean to you? Is it the experience of doing something new, going someplace maybe you've never been before? Is it food? My husband, anytime we talk about a trip I hope to take, I ask him what does he want to do in that place? What does he want to think about? What does he care about? And his answer is food. That's his real travel priority, is just trying food in different places and really experiencing that. Or is it a luxury stay? Is it taking that break? Is it maybe someplace that kind of looks more all inclusive? What does travel look like to you? So that way, once you figure out your travel budget, once you figure out what you have to put toward it, how can you work towards those values that you have? And knowing those values and those priorities can help inform you, especially when we get to things that could be budget busters. What could you save on? What's less important? What can we cut? And what are the real priorities that we want to have this travel budget money go toward? The next thing to think about is to ideally set aside travel savings each month. In the studies that we pulled from for those statistics, there's a lot of data on how much travel people put on credit cards or go into debt for. And that makes that expense even more expensive. So if we're able to save up for these travel plans, kind of anticipate what we're working toward, we have that money set aside. It's part of the plan. It's something that we're saving even on that potential interest rate there by not putting it on a credit card. So figuring out in the future, what do I want my travel to look like? What's a realistic budget for me? And how might I be able to work towards saving to reach some of these travel goals I have can be really helpful too. And then, as I kind of mentioned, using those values you have to stick to your plan. This is a tip we talk about anytime we talk about budgeting. But if you're somebody who really values travel, whatever that looks like, whatever those priorities are, have that reminder somewhere you can see. Have that like trip. For me, it's like a Pinterest board or kind of a vision board of saying, these are the goals I have. This is the trip I want to take on here in the future. This is what I'm saving for. This is why I have this part of my budget. And so that way you can help prioritize that piece and help work towards those goals you have. So that way you have that money saved up for the time it's when you're taking that trip, and it's kind of part of the plan there. And then tracking your expenses is another thing, both when you're kind of going on the trip and working towards these things, but with your overall budget generally, just knowing what you're spending on. So that way you have that increased awareness, seeing kind of where the money is going can really inform you on big picture budget as well as travel budget stuff as well. So that way you see all those expenses, you see all those transactions, you know what that looks like. So that way you say, okay, here's what my expenses are, here's what I'm dealing with, here's how I can work toward my travel goals based on what you have to work with. After you kind of get some of that big picture budgeting for travel stuff sorted out and thought about, the next thing to do is to watch out for potential travel budget busters. And with this, my biggest recommendation and our biggest recommendation is to look at the whole picture of travel before we even start booking anything for the trip or before we start doing anything. Because a lot of those travel expenses can be interdependent on each other. They're going to be related. And when you start doing research to see like how much it might cost to go somewhere, what that flight price looks like, what those hotel costs are, a lot of the times that first price you see might be the lowest and might cover the bare minimum. And also might not, depending on what you're looking like, we want to make sure we're looking at those prices for like that specific place, that specific time, the exact same thing that we want, because flight prices and hotel prices, as you all might know, can fluctuate quite a bit. So we want to be very specific with our research and do all of the research that we can possibly do before we book anything. So that way we get the big picture. This is how much it's going to cost. And yes, it fits within my budget and makes sense. As I mentioned, all of these expenses are interdependent. So, as you're doing travel research and trying to think, where am I going? When might I want to go there? What are my real priorities? What do I want to do? Think about transportation both while you're there, getting there, all of those parts. Think about how lodging fits into it. Think about that food piece. Think about pre trip expenses too, things that you might need to get in order to have that experience make sense or be worthwhile. If you live in our home state of Colorado, you might not have a lot of rain gear. The past month has been kind of a weird kind of experience for Coloradans. It usually doesn't quite rain this much, but for the most part, it's not a really rainy state here. It's a little more dry, so we might not have some serious rain gear. But if we're traveling, for example, somewhere that's really wet or really rainy, we might need to plan to get gear, or rent gear could be an option as well, that can accommodate for that different place. So that's just an example of one pre-trip expense that you might want to think about that could tie into this overall picture and be related to these overall plans. Souvenirs are another one. If you are somebody who likes to take things back from your trips, kind of plan for that too. How does that fall into the budget? And then if you have animals at home or a space that really needs to be cared for, you can't just kind of leave it, planning that pet and homesteading as well. Usually at this point when I teach webinars, my cats have come to say hi. And so I'm able to be like, yes, this pet sitter that I need somebody to watch when I'm out of town makes sense, but they're off doing their own thing today. And then travel documents or travel like visas, passports, related things might be something else that's part of the picture, especially if you are going out of the country, taking that international trip. Those are fees and expenses that we want to include in part of the plan to make sure it fits within the budget, makes overall sense, and we can see the whole picture before we book anything, because all these little things can add up. Once we kind of get the whole picture and start to think about that, then we want to start thinking about how we might be able to save and really lean into what those priorities are for the trip. So that way we're able to make the most of the budget that we do have. And this is something that even if we're going away home for the weekend, like doing something where we're getting out of the house, we're doing something, we're enjoying that, some things to keep in mind. Or if we're taking that like really big trip, it's the trip of the lifetime and we just want to make the most of it, all of these tips that we talk about are things to keep in mind. So the first thing we really want to dive into is like, where are we going? What's that destination look like? So typically speaking, in order to make the most of a budget, or in order to kind of cut some cost or bring costs lower, some things to consider with destination selection include avoiding really popular destinations. If all your friends on social media are going to that place, everybody's going there, those places might have higher hotel fees, they might have higher fees for doing things because there are a lot of people going to that place and they know that. And so those popular destinations tend to have a general like tourist surcharge for that. So checking out some of the places that might not be as popular can still give you a really great experience, really meet a lot of potentially some of those travel priorities that you're thinking about or looking at, while still fitting within the budget. So one thing to consider. But if you're like, I have this dream trip, it's going to this place, it might be popular, that's a priority that you have, and there are other places to look to save. Another thing to consider is that off-season or shoulder season travel. This can be really relative to the place and all of the other factors going on. A lot of the times I found where you see something is called shoulder season, and that's actually the most recommended time for people to go there. And because of that quote unquote shoulder season, it might be like slightly outside the summer on those ends. You might see some of those prices rise. But with this, when you're thinking about summer travel specifically, What are some places where you can still meet those priorities, have a really great time, but it's not necessarily the place that everybody's going to in the summer? Because again, more people tends to mean more expenses, increase those prices because those places know that. Again, revisiting those values and priorities. What does that destination really look like for you? What's most important? And note that how far you travel really matters with your budget. Typically speaking, staying within the United States, taking a domestic flight is going to be a lot cheaper than going somewhere internationally for this trip. And especially if we're not even flying, we're driving to that place, that can save us a lot of money as well, because those flights, generally speaking, tend to be more expensive than just paying for gas for that trip. So if there are destinations that you can reasonably drive to and it makes sense for you, that might be a good way to kind of limit what your destination options might look like and say, we're going to pick somewhere that we can reasonably drive to. If you're again based in Colorado where we are, there are a lot of phenomenal options for a great trip. But if you are like, I really want to get out of the country, I want to go somewhere new, I want to try something new, just check to see how it fits within your budget. And as we'll talk about here in a minute, really shop around for those flights because there are a lot of ways to bring even those costs down. So speaking of bringing some of those costs down, some big picture ways to think about saving on lodging and transportation include looking at travel rewards that you might already have. Generally speaking, there are some great travel rewards programs or travel cards that you can check out that don't have annual fees or have low annual fees. Again, we want to kind of watch out for how that might offset the overall budget. But when we're looking at travel rewards, if we're somebody who travels a lot or it's really a priority for us, that's something that we might be able to utilize to kind of save money, be part of the plan. Again, that's real big picture stuff for flights, rental cars, etc. The other thing to really think about is where we're staying. So with this, camping on the list or staying in hostels or something like that, they have their downsides. Something to note. Again, think about priorities. Think about what makes sense for the trip, what makes sense for you and the group who might be traveling with you. But if that's an option and that's something that makes sense for you all, that can bring a lot of certain fees down. But even with something like camping, thinking about the other fees related to it. So yeah, paying for one night of camping somewhere might be a lot less than a hotel and vacation rentals. But if you don't already have the tent and the sleeping bag or the RV or whatever that might look like, how are those costs offsetting the overall trip? So again, one reason why it's really important to do that big picture, how are all of these things related research to get that overall budget in mind. And then with vacation rentals and hotels, think about location, think about what makes sense for you, look at overall price. Sometimes vacation rentals can be a little cheaper, but they might not have some supports that hotels might have. A lot of times it might make sense if you're traveling with a really big group to look into that. Look at both is the moral of the story, and really like kind of figure out what is going to make sense for you big picture overall with your specific situation with these options here. But just exploring all of these options and see what might make sense for you. And note that if you're somebody, especially you might be under 30, hostels a lot of times they're really great prices. Some of them do have age restrictions, some of them don't, but it's a way to travel and make the most of your budget and still get to different places. So check those out as well. Flight and hotel packages are another thing to kind of explore. Sometimes you can see really good deals for them. I always recommend kind of comparing those costs. Is this package something that it makes it easy to book? It's going to save me money overall. Or do I have time and energy to kind of DIY this a little bit, save money here and there, do a lot more research, and kind of compare those two options there? Because sometimes you're going to get the really good deals. It's going to keep it easy. It's going to be cheaper overall. Sometimes it might be cheaper for you to DIY it. Same thing with all-inclusive deals. If you're somebody who you really like that ease of things, you might be looking at staying in one place. It's all inclusive. That could be a good option to check out. But a lot of times, overall, if you kind of DIY it, piece it together, it takes a lot more time and energy, but you might save money from that. It just depends on the situation. So compare both options. And then with general transportation, using public transportation in places that you're able to, taking the train, taking the bus can be a really great way to save money versus renting a car and spending on gas. But not all places can accommodate that or make sense for that. So that's where all that research ahead of time can really help you. And if you're thinking about it and really want to kind of stay local or look at different options that might not involve getting very far, we always love recommending a good staycation, from enjoying something like backyard camping to hiking. Again, if you're in Colorado, so many opportunities for hiking out here. Thinking about being a tourist in your own city is another thing to consider. How would you do that? What would that look like? Just bring that new lens to the place that you've been living. Go on a day trip somewhere. Again, if you're able to drive and not have to stay somewhere, can save a lot of money and still have a great time that way. DIY crafts, go on a scavenger hunt, have that spa day at home, really kind of create your own experience for this. So just feel free to let your creativity shine here with all of these options and think, how can I create the trip I want in the space that I have here? Another thing to consider is looking into free or inexpensive local events and festivals. And in order to find a lot of those, connecting with your local library can be a really great resource. They'll often share a lot of those free opportunities out there, that we might not always be aware that are happening right around the corner. And then we're going on this big grand vacation just down the street from where we live. You are looking into, especially flying somewhere or going further out, a few tips to keep in mind are here. So book early, but not too early. Generally speaking, if you're flying domestic, 1.5 to 3 months is the sweet spot. And if you're flying international, a little further out, 3 to 6 months is the sweet spot for the best flights. Again, researching and comparing different flights from different options, including Google Flights, Hopper, Skyscanner, maybe travel apps or programs that you might have, just to see where you can get the best deal, can be great. And note that midweek, like Tuesdays, Wednesdays especially, can be the best or cheapest days to travel. That doesn't always make sense with everybody's plan. So if you know that you're going to be flying like on a Friday or on a weekend, know those flights are probably going to be more expensive, and have that as part of the overall plan, as part of the budget. And then traveling at off-peak times, especially booking flights really late at night or really early in the morning, can save you money as well. But note that that might be one of those situations that offsets costs elsewhere. Because if you're leaving the airport at midnight and the bus stops running at 11, or earlier, you might have to drive there, park there, get an Uber, something like that. There might be extra fees. So just do some research on how all those costs are related, and see if it really does make sense to save the money by flying at an odd time, or if that actually is going to make you spend more overall because of the complication it takes to get there, and the energy it might spend on you as well to have those really odd time flights. So just look at how they're related to see which is going to save you money most overall. Once you get wherever you're going, a few things to keep in mind are, uh, with food. A lot of kind of travel budgeting folks will recommend cooking meals, buying grocery snacks, etc. That can be a really great way to save money if it makes sense with kind of the overall picture of where you're staying in your trip. If you're in some sort of vacation rental and it already has a lot of those kind of staple items for cooking and tools for cooking, cook the meals there, save the money. That can be a great way to go about it. But if you're having to buy, salt and a cooking pan and all those things in order to actually cook at the place, is that really saving you the money? So again, just looking at the overall picture there and thinking about those things. Another thing to keep in mind is to just, if you're traveling, especially at a place that's a really popular destination, go a few streets over, go a few blocks over to eat at restaurants, because those touristy restaurants that are right next to those main locations, they know that, and they often have increased prices because of that. So go over, eat somewhere else, avoid those touristy restaurants. It can help you save money and maybe have a more authentic experience too. Another thing to consider is those free or self-guided tours. So one way to do this is to use those libraries to see what resources might be out there, to see what sort of free events might be happening, or to look into free tours in specific areas. Or you can look into like what might already be recorded as like a free walking guide or audio tour, to have that information, get that tour, have that experience, and go through it yourself. Same thing with free museum days. A lot of different places might have those free days, so check out what might make sense. Shopping local, and really utilizing that new place that you might be and seeing what's out there can be another way to save a little bit while you're there. And know what your souvenir budget is. That's another really key one. Checking the data plan, kind of knowing what information limits you might have, what data limits you might have, comparing different options, researching how much you might use based on what other people have reported can be really key for that piece. And limiting what you pack, because bag fees, man, those can really get you. So packing smart, packing light can help in a lot of different ways, and really keep an eye out for those hidden fees as well. Can be another thing to keep in mind. Another part of financial wellness and budgeting for trips and preparing for this is overall safety, just because that can impact our finances and our overall experience in a lot of ways. A lot of these things are probably things that we've heard before. I want to highlight a few just to keep in mind. So, looking into kind of how people, like what might be going on in a specific local area and how people recommend keeping safe in that area, and like what you might want to know. So researching local customs, researching kind of what people recommend for that specific area as far as safety goes can be really key. Another one I want to point out is, if you're going to a space where tap water is unsafe, prepare in your budget to drink that bottled water. Think about that ahead of time. Look at those numbers so that way it's part of the plan. And avoid using that public Wi-Fi for secured access to like websites or checking your banking app, etc., because that's something that hackers can get on and they can access that. It kind of exposes a lot of your information, so be careful with that. And the real big thing is knowing where to go to help for help. So knowing your resources that are out there. Travel insurance is another one to look at and think about, because oftentimes, as we saw with those numbers earlier, these are big investments that people have, things that we really care about. And so making sure that trip is insured in case anything happens can be part of the plan and part of the budget. Having a travel emergency fund is another thing. Oftentimes, things come up when we're traveling, totally unexpected. So have some sort of buffer to say, here is something that if this happens, then I have this money set aside as part of the plan to cover it. And then pay attention to health advisories, travel advisories. Here's some resources to check those out. You can use the resources to compare different flight costs, hotel costs, expenses like that, to get that whole picture in mind. And you can set notifications as well, so it'll notify you if those prices change at all. And then download maps offline for especially driving in different areas, so you have that if you don't have that self-service available, can be very helpful. With that, kind of the last thing I want to share is, if you didn't already know, it offers free financial coaching. You all don't need to be members of INT to utilize this resource, and it's one-on-one somebody helping you with budgeting. It could be credit goals, savings goals, debt repayment. So if there's a specific trip you have in mind or something you're working toward, or you just really want to know what you have in your budget to spend toward travel, you can meet with somebody and come up with those plans and help get some of those answers and think about those things. Again, free. It's not sales based. You don't need to be a member, just a service we want to offer to our communities. So thank you everybody for joining today. I hope you have a few takeaways to have a great summer vacation, great summer travel, be it going somewhere really far or enjoying the wonderful things we have in Colorado. And we hope to see you all at another webinar. Thank you, everybody.